My jacket is made up of a front, back and side body panels. As you see, there is no side seam. Mark the side body with pins at the underarm and at the hem where it would meet the side seam. If yours has no side body panel, you can ignore this part. My jacket has a centre back seam. If yours doesn't, find the centre. My jacket has a centre back seam. If yours doesn't, find the centre point of the back neck, mark with a pin, and also at the centre back at the hem. This is so you can create your centre back when you're tracing out. The jacket is fastened at the centre front with buttons and has a lapel which folds back. This fold is known as the break line, and the break line finishes at the break point, which is also where the first button is positioned. There's also a collar which is made of two parts, a collar stand and the collar. The collar stand is stitched from the back neck all the way around to the front lapel, and the collar itself is stitched to the top edge of the collar stand and also finishes at the front lapel. The collar itself is made of an under collar and a top collar, and it folds back on the roll line. Inside the front, you see there is a front facing. This is used to finish the front seams, but it's also visible when the lapel folds back. This area is the facing. My jacket sleeves are made of two pieces, top sleeve and the undersleeve. The undersleeve is attached to the side body panel, and this notch here relates to the underarm on this undersleeve as well. If yours sleeve is a one-piece sleeve, you'll just have one seam that runs down here into the underarm. On a one-piece sleeve, the grain line will come from the shoulder to the centre of the cuff line. On my sleeve, because there's two pieces, this is the way you create your grain line. You'll take measure from the shoulder point and let it hang down naturally like a plumb line to the cuff. Where it meets the cuff, mark with a pin. I'm going to show you now how to trace a jacket and make your pattern from here. This is a very accurate way to make a trace, as you can see the seam lines whilst making the first draft. Starting with the side body panel, pin a line from the underarm pin to the hem pin. Pin a line along the break line, finishing at the break point. Cut out your plastic to fit generously around the front panel. Pin the plastic onto the front jacket so it doesn't move around. Then pin around the body seams, inserting the pins perpendicular to the seam lines. Make sure you get the correct shape along the shoulder line. Before you pin into the armhole, cut the plastic to a similar shape, snipping carefully into the curve. Now it's ready to pin. You can snip more if necessary. Now, using a pen that won't smudge, a Sharpie or a ballpoint pen are ideal. Draw a line onto the plastic along all the seam lines. Mark any darts on your jacket. Also mark the break line, button placement, pockets and any other details you want to use. Remove the plastic from the garment and stick down to paper. Redraw the seam lines clearly onto the plastic, including the darts and pockets. Now trace through onto your paper and redraw the front pattern. The centre of the button is also the centre front of the garment. Using this centre front as a guide, draw a line parallel from here, marking it as your grain line, and label pattern piece. Here we have the side seams marked with the pins. Attach the plastic as we did before, making sure you can see the pin line. Draw in the seam lines, snipping into the plastic at any curved seams. Ensure you mark the underarm and hem notches. Here you can see I've also traced out the side body and backs onto paper. The side body has notches at the underarm and hem. I've drawn a line between these two notches and this is the grain line. The back body has its grain line marked parallel to the centre back. The pattern needs waist notches added to all the pattern pieces. Working with the front side seam, first draw a notch parallel with the top button. Then we need to mark this notch on the side body panel. Starting at the hem, walk your pattern pieces on top of each other, marking the waist notch. Using this new notch, mark another onto the back seam as well. As it's the back side body seam, make sure it's a double notch. As before, walk your seams together, marking the back notches as you go along. Here you can also make corrections to the seam lengths and armhole shape if necessary. Finally, add a notch to the centre back waist, and as this is a long seam, a double notch at the chest. This will help with construction. The centre back can also be the fold line with no notches if you have no centre back seam. If your jacket has a chest dart, also known as a fisheye dart, you'll need to add the dart legs to the pattern. Find the centre of the line and mark out 3 mm each side. Draw new dart legs from these points to either end of the dart. You now have the correct dart shaping. If your jacket has a full body dart, the dart will go from the chest through the waist to the hip. You will have already marked the stitch line on your pattern. However, you need to add the dart fold width and the second dart leg. At the waist, add a point 1.5 cm towards the side seam. This is the widest part of the dart with the most suppression. Draw the second dart leg from the new waist point to the chest and hip. As you've taken existing body width for the dart fold, you must add this onto the side seam at the waist. Mark 1.5 cm from the waist notch and draw a new side seam to the underarm and hem. Erase original side seam. You can do this for the back darts as well. Add a point 1.5 cm towards the side seam from the end of the dart at the waist. This is the widest part of the dart with the most suppression. Draw the second dart leg from this point to the end of the dart. From the waist point of the first dart leg, draw a perpendicular line to the side seam. This new line is a waist seam. Measure the line. From the second dart leg, draw another perpendicular waist seam line, the same length as the first waist seam. Now draw from the end of this second waist seam to the underarm. You need to cut along these waist seams to the first dart leg so you can construct it correctly. When the dart is stitched together, you now have 2 waist seams the same length that can also be used for pockets and pocket detailing. My jacket has a 2-piece sleeve comprised of a top and undersleeve. Trace the undersleeve first. Remember to pin through perpendicular to the seam. And snip into the plastic at the underarm curve. Mark seams with pen. Ensure you notch the underarm where it meets the side body. Redraw lines and notch cleanly onto the plastic. Finally, trace through onto paper and label. We will add the grain line after we've traced the top sleeve. Cut enough plastic to fit this sleeve as it's wider and folds around to meet the undersleeve. Pin the plastic in place, folding carefully around the folds. Then pin perpendicular along the seams. Cut plastic around the sleeve head and snip into the curve. Mark all seam lines, shoulder and cuff notches as before. Redraw lines cleanly onto the plastic. Add shoulder and cuff notches. Draw a line between these two notches. This becomes the grain line. Trace through onto paper and label top sleeve. You need to add notches on both seams of the sleeves. Find the central point on the front seam and mark. Walk the front sleeve seams together and mark through notch. Keep walking along the seam, and when you get to the underarm, reshape and correct length if necessary. On both the back seams, you mark a notch 15 cm up from the cuff line and 15 cm down from the underarm. This leaves space for any ease to be stitched along this seam. Finally, lay back seams together like this. Trace the grain line from the top sleeve through onto the undersleeve, and then redraw. Fold the sleeve in half, bringing the underarm points together. Press and fold into the sleeve. Open and mark the fold in as the grain line. Make sure the cuff length is equidistant either side of this new grain line, and also the sleeve seams. Correct if not. I've done the same procedure with the collar and collar stand. The pattern draft is only half the collars, with both pieces ending at the centre back for now. The collar stand has a straight grain which helps it hold its shape. The shoulder neck point is marked with a notch that says SNP. The collar has the bias grain line marked with a cross. This allows for the fabric to curve nicely around the neck. The roll line is also marked. To see how the collars correspond with the neckline, I've pinned the back and front together. Here you can see the centre back and the SNP on the collar stand. From the centre back of the body, walk your collar stand along the neckline, marking a notch at the front lapel. When you stitch the collars together, the collar is stitched to the upper edge of the collar stand like this. Here you can see where the collar is stitched to the lapel as well. The end is also marked with a notch.